president of Brazil suspended from office and facing impeachment. Corrupt politician or victim of a political coup. A one-on-one interview with Dilma Rousseff. I'm Elaine Reyes in Washington, D.C., and this is a special edition of America's Now.
Dilma Rousseff is fighting for her political life.
The Constitution says that the president can only be removed when a crime has been committed. I have not committed a crime.
After months of economic turmoil, political disorder, and a social upheaval, Brazil's president is being put on trial for impeachment. She condemns it as a coup, calls it a grace, and vows to never give up.
I believe that this will be a fight for my country.
We'll look at the corporate scandal that overwhelmed her government.
Would you be able to single out
and sit down to speak with her at the presidential palace. We'll also get reaction and insight into her interview.
Welcome to this special edition of America's Now. She entered office in 2011 as Brazil's first female president, riding a wave of prosperity. At the time, economists predicted Brazil was on track to have the world's fifth largest economy by the time it played host to the Summer Olympics in 2016. With those Olympic Games just weeks away, Dilma Rousseff has been ousted from the presidential office and awaits a trial for her impeachment. Where did it all go wrong? A bribery scandal involving the state-run oil company Petrobras is mostly to blame. It's been called the biggest corruption scandal in Brazil's history. Hundreds of millions of dollars allegedly diverted from the oil company and put into the accounts of Brazilian politicians and business leaders. Rousseff was never directly implicated in the corruption scandal and has denied any wrongdoing. She insists she is the victim of a political coup. Correspondent Stephen Gibbs gives us an overview of the corruption probe that engulfed the entire government.
Mass protests in Brazil. Twice in the space of a month, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets here. They're calling for the ousting of their president, Dilma Rousseff.
O povo clama por justiça e ética. Esse é o grito do povo. E fora corruptos, fora corruptores. Nós queremos Brasil justo, igualitário, livre da corrupção.
But this isn't just politically motivated. These demonstrators are angry at the recent explosive revelations of corruption at the heart of Brazil's biggest company. State-controlled oil giant Petrobras was meant to be an engine of growth for the new emerging Brazil. Massive discoveries off the coast of Rio had led some to believe that within a decade this country could become a major oil exporter. The then president, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, was one of the most vocal proponents of Brazil's oil-producing future. A share sale he attended in 20 raised a then global record of $70 billion, much of which was sold to small investors. Petrobras overnight became the fourth biggest company in the world.
Petrobras was emblematic of Brazil. It was the crown jewel of Brazil. If you talk to Brazilians and ask them, you know, how do they feel about their country and how do they know that their country is in the right direction, Petrobras was always mentioned as one of the reasons why they felt that they were a modern and sophisticated country.
But recently, the dream has been shattered. The company's share price has plummeted, its credit rating reduced to junk, and billions of dollars are missing. The scale of the scandal emerged when this Petrobras executive, Paulo Roberto Costa, was investigated on relatively low-key money laundering charges. In a plea bargaining deal with the police, he began to describe what he knew was really going on at the company. Over a period of several years, he alleged, Construction firms contracted by Petrobras in its process of massive expansion, building projects such as refineries, would be encouraged to overcharge in return for the payment of enormous bribes.
Part of that money would be funneled to top-level politicians from the PT's governing coalition for the bids and the contracts with Petrobras.
This man, Pedro Barusco, a third-tier executive who once headed up the corporation's engineering division, gave a glimpse of that when he agreed to pay back $100 million he'd obtained in bribes. He's admitted holding the money in bank accounts in Switzerland and Uruguay. He also says he believes the president's own party likely received twice the amount he did.
A mim, uma quantia eu recebi. Cabia ao PT uma outra quantia. Eu estimo que possa ter sido até 150, 200 milhões. Eu não tenho esse valor.
Some allege that Petrobras has not just enriched executives, but has been used like a cash machine by the governing Workers' Party. And amongst those currently being investigated are many of this country's most senior politicians. The head of the Senate and the head of the lower house have denied any wrongdoing. In early February, the entire senior board of Petrobras resigned, including its CEO, Graça Foster, a close personal friend of President Rousseff. Foster has repeatedly said she was entirely unaware of any bribery schemes operating in the company.
Nunca soube de propina na Petrobras.
Com coragem e até sofrimento, o Brasil tem aprendido.
President Rousseff, whilst energy minister, was chair of the board of Petrobras at the time many of the crimes are believed to have taken place. She also has not been accused and has denied all knowledge of any wrongdoing.
Livre e rigorosa nos episódios lamentáveis contra a Petrobras.
We spent a few hours with a taxi driver that works here in Rio's Vidregal shantytown. Theo voted for Dilma Rousseff in the last elections. Now, with the corruption allegations emerging, he's disillusioned.
Essa foi uma das eleições que eu fui mais confiante, cara. Acordei cedo, eu fui amarradão, sabe? Votar nela. Mas sendo que tanta coisa acontece, tanta pilantragem, cara, que a gente não sabe quem tá errado, quem tá certo.
Do you think people like you and supporters of Dilma are they angry enough that you know the government may have to change?
A gente não é um só que manda, entendeu? Praticamente ela é mandada pelos outros, entendeu? Então acho que não vai, não sei não, cara. Eu tô muito minha vontade é ir embora daqui, entendeu? Se eu tivesse condições mesmo, um trabalho, um lugar bom, se alguém me chamasse assim pra mim sair, eu ia embora com a minha família daqui, porque gente, não dá.
And who do you hold responsible for this unbelievable corruption? I mean, do you hold just the senior executives at Petrobras responsible, or is it a political problem? Is the president responsible?
Acho que é todos eles, entendeu? Porque é um acusando o outro. E ela nomeia um grandão, um cara que ela confiou, sacaneou ela, o próprio cara que ela botou lá, o cara que é o cabeça da corrupção lá dentro lá. Entendeu? É todos eles, é um jogando pro outro, entendeu? Todos eles.
Back in the community, we asked some of Theo's passengers what they thought. Eloisa is a 20-year-old student.
A gente não sabe quem é o verdadeiro culpado, tá sempre um jogando um pro outro, e a gente tá sendo mais prejudicado na história, né?
She points out that when one of Brazil's biggest companies suffers, the effects are felt far and wide.
A gente estava até falando sobre essa cidade do pré-sal, que várias pessoas investiram. Eu tenho um amigo meu que investiu em várias lanchonetes lá e agora ele tá falido, acabou tendo que fechar tudo, entendeu? As pessoas fizeram um maior investimento achando que iam dar alguma coisa e acabaram se afundando por conta disso.
Luísa, teu número, Luísa! Teu número!
Pode ser.
Rosangela works as a domestic maid.
É automática a porta? Se você parar para perguntar para todas as pessoas, a resposta assim é sempre a mesma. Ninguém nunca está satisfeito com essa situação, porque não é de acordo com o que todos os brasileiros esperam de um país grande, de uma imensidão em riquezas, como o Brasil é. Então, por causa de políticos, dessa corrupção toda, o país não cresce, cresce ao contrário. Eles têm sempre uma proposta para fazer para o povo que não é o que o povo espera, né? Que beneficia eles próprios, que já tem uma condição, né, muito melhor do que de outros níveis, né? A solução já é o povo sair mesmo, protestar, sim, mas de uma maneira pacífica, não quebrando, entendeu? As coisas, assim, entendeu? Porque eu acho que vai denigrir muito a imagem do país lá fora.
This scandal could become dangerous for the government because it is affecting many who have no direct connection with the oil industry. Will ordinary Brazilians accept the argument that by exposing corruption, Brazil is at least on the road towards confronting it? Or has their patience already run out?
Brazil's economy has been in free fall throughout the Petrobras corruption investigations. The country is now experiencing its most dire economic crisis in decades. Many of the Brazilians whose party helped pull out of poverty have fallen back into it. It led to mass protests across the nation demanding Rousseff's resignation and led to the legal proceedings to suspend her from office. Let's take a look at some of the key dates in the impeachment drama. A parliamentary committee investigating corruption at Petrobras President Dilma Rousseff of any corruption involvement, stating they have found no proof against her. Congressional leader Eduardo Cunha opens up proceedings to impeach President Rousseff after receiving a petition from lawyers charging her with manipulating public funds to cover budget deficits. State prosecutors seek the arrest of former President Lula da Silva. They accuse him of money laundering in relation to the Petrobras scandal. Protest rallies erupt calling for Rousseff's removal from office. An estimated 3 million people protest in 22 states. Protesters believe Rousseff must have known about corruption at Petrobras and failed to stop it. President Rousseff names Lula da Silva her chief of staff. Accepting a cabinet position gives Lula da Silva immunity from federal prosecution, but not the Supreme Court. A Brazilian judge obstructs Lula da Silva from becoming President Rousseff's chief of staff. A congressional committee in Brazil accuses President Dilma Rousseff of misusing public funds. They vote 38 to 27 to impeach Rousseff. Both houses of Brazil's Congress vote to suspend Dilma Rousseff as president and call for an impeachment trial. She must step down for 180 days as president. Vice President Michel Temer assumes office as Brazil's acting president. His appointment ends by the Workers' Party.
America's Now.
Welcome back. In May, CCTV was granted a rare interview with President Dilma Rousseff. It took place at the Palácio de Alvorada, the presidential residence in the capital, Brasilia. While Rousseff has lost her presidential office until the close of her impeachment trial, she's allowed to remain in the presidential palace and keep her peace. CCTV correspondent Paulo Cabral conducted the interview with the suspended Brazilian president. Let's take a look at some of the highlights.
Agora, eu estou na fase em que eu tenho de lutar. E acredito que será uma luta que contribuirá para o meu país. Por isso eu tenho certeza que eu tenho de lutar, não apenas pelo meu mandato, sem dúvida também pelo meu mandato, mas sobretudo porque está em questão no Brasil não só a democracia, mas todas as conquistas que nós tivemos nos últimos anos, em todas as esferas. Tanto no que se refere à evolução e à melhoria da vida do povo brasileiro. Tiramos mais de 40 milhões de pessoas da pobreza. Mas também em relação a tudo que conquistamos internacionalmente. A própria política externa brasileira, que fez com que nós dessemos extrema importância para a própria América Latina, para a África e também para os países BRICS. Isso sem dizer que damos importância também aos Estados Unidos e à União Europeia. Mas antes não havia essa importância da América Latina, da África e dos países BRICS. Era como se a gente tivesse voltado as costas para a nossa própria região e para as outras regiões, e só víssemos os países envolvidos. Então, essa luta que eu estou travando é uma luta para assegurar e para garantir que o que conquistamos nos últimos 13 anos, 14 anos, seja de fato uma conquista sólida, firme e que não haja retrocesso.
Joining me now in the studio to give us some reaction to President Rousseff's interview is Professor Eric Langer. He is the former director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
President Rousseff says that she wants to fight. Does she have a fight? She's talking about all the good things that she's done for Brazil. Can she do it?
Well, I think she's going to try, but it seems that politically things are against her. Now, if I remember correctly, the Senate voted 56 against her, and it needed to be at least 55 votes. So in fact, I think what she's doing right now is trying to launch a campaign so that the Senate votes later when, after the process goes to the Supreme Court, then that she doesn't lose the presidency. But that's really an uphill battle right now because, as you know, Brazilian politics are so messy right now with all the corruption charges and things like that. And so everybody in one way or another is affected, and in fact what appears to be the case is that at least as some ministers who've now had to resign have suggested, this is a way of getting them out of corruption charges that actually the vast majority of Congress unfortunately is under right now.
And she is trying to make her case outside of Brazil. She mentioned some of the countries, some of the regions that Brazil has had successful dealings with. Let's take a listen to something else she had to say about that.
Aceito nesses termos seria golpe de Estado. Golpe de Estado é por isso que a gente diferencia um do outro. E há literatura a respeito. O impeachment sem base, o impeachment porque o artigo 85 da Constituição exige que tenha crime de responsabilidade. Só diz que não está previsto na Constituição. Agora, é absoluta ingenuidade dizer que está previsto na Constituição e não completar. Está previsto em que condições? Porque senão você está falando uma meia-verdade. E o resto da verdade, qual é? É o crime de responsabilidade. E eles não conseguem dizer que é crime de responsabilidade 6 decretos e um plano safra. O plano safra do qual sequer eu tive um ato participando. E eles não conseguem dizer qual é o crime. Então, é um processo que leva a uma imensa dificuldade. Por isso que eles queriam sistematicamente que eu renunciasse. Por quê? Se eu renunciasse, eu facilitaria o processo. Eles não teriam de enfrentar o problema do motivo pelo qual eu estou sendo afastada. Eu estou sendo afastada por um motivo sem fundamento. Daí é que eu digo que eu estou sendo injustiçada. E é isso que caracteriza o lado golpista. O que é um golpe? O golpe é um expediente que estão usando para tirar uma pessoa que não tem base legal para tirar. É isso que é o golpe.
President Rousseff telling the world that she is the victim of a coup d'etat. Is she a victim?
Well, first of all, many people on the left in various organizations, which I get lots of emails from, are asserting that. But I don't think it's really the case. Certainly, there's a power struggle. but for me, coup d'etat is where the military steps in and takes over. And what's actually quite interesting here is that despite the fact that President Rousseff sees herself as profoundly wronged, that there's no mention whatsoever of the military or of anything like that. This is really, more than anything else, something where you have the legislature becoming much stronger than has been anticipated. And in that case, they are taking over, and because Rousseff's popularity is so low, it's in the like that, that she really doesn't have the popular support. Of course, she won the last election just by very few votes. And actually, what's interesting is the first time in Brazilian history that northern Brazil actually elected the president. Always it was southern Brazil that, since the founding of the republic, and that always won. But this time Rousseff won by depending on the north, and so as a result she really is looking at things very differently and wants to get back the presidential system that had been in place, but because of the real unpopularity that she has right now, that's not the case.
Obviously, she was popular at one point to be elected. She is the first female president of Brazil. So what happened there? If she was unpopular, was that really her main downfall, or was she just an easy target?
Well, I think it's, as always, it's a little bit of both. I think she's an easy target right now, and so people are taking aim at her. Michel Temer, who is now the interim president, who is her declared enemy at this point. Of course, he wasn't when they were reelected.
She says she was betrayed by him.
Exactly, and I think that's probably true. That's a good way to put it, but that's the way it is, and that's what happens in politics. But I think the other thing is this kind of a perfect storm, because in addition to the fact that the Brazilian middle classes actually were protesting against the lack of infrastructure spending, the inefficiency of the government, and of course in this vast corruption scandal with Petrobras that exploded on the scene. And so as a result, that was one problem. But the other thing is, of course, that suddenly the commodities boom is over. And if you will, Brazil really tied its economic fortune to the commodities express. And of course that has stopped, mainly because China simply isn't growing as quickly, and so commodities prices as a result tanked. And so suddenly she doesn't have any money anymore, she's highly unpopular. You have the issues with the Zika virus, you have all kinds of things like that going on, and the president, who is really responsible because this is presidential system, suddenly finds that she has no resources to do anything because she doesn't have the money anymore, and so suddenly her popularity really tanked as well.
Let's talk about Petrobras. Could she have known? Let's listen to what she has to say about that.
É golpe congressual. Nós vivemos aqui no Brasil num regime presidencialista. Nesse regime presidencialista, a Constituição estabelece que o presidente só pode ser afastado quando comete crime. Ora, eu não cometi nenhum crime. Não tenho contas na Suíça, não tenho acusação de corrupção. Do que me acusam? Me acusam de ter operado o orçamento de forma incorreta e que, ao invés de cortar gastos, eu teria deixado os gastos ocorrer. Pois bem, primeiro, isso não é verdade. Nós cortamos, talvez fizemos um grande ajuste fiscal no Brasil. Mas por que eles me acusam? Me acusam por quê? Disso porque não tenho outro motivo para me acusar. Então, este motivo é bastante frágil. Por quê? Porque todos os presidentes que me antecederam cometeram, tiveram a mesma prática em relação igual. Não só fizeram créditos suplementares, que é disso que se trata, mas fizeram em número muito maior do que eu. E não era crime na época deles e não é crime hoje. É simplesmente uma prática no exercício da atividade governamental. Além disso, é sabido que o presidente da Câmara recebeu este processo e o recebeu por quê? Queria se vingar do governo que não aceitou a chantagem dele. Então, é um processo que tem esse pecado original. Ele é fruto de um desvio de poder. Um desvio de poder porque no exercício da sua atividade, ele usou a aceitação de um processo para se vingar. Ele tem uma concepção completamente diferente do meu governo. Ele propõe e defende ajustes bastante neoliberais no Brasil.
So do you think President Dilma Rousseff committed any kind of crime, or do you think she's being penalized for a technicality?
Well, I think it's a technicality that can be defined as a misuse of power. So whether that's a crime or not is something, I'm not a lawyer and I can't tell you, certainly much less a lawyer of Brazilian law. But quite clearly what she did was not correct. And as a result, I think you can be impeached for that because she was trying to manipulate the budget so that she would be reelected. It
Something
worked.
that several of her predecessors have done in the past.
Exactly. And of course, at that point, Congress didn't impeach those presidents, but that's not up to the president to decide, that's up to Congress to decide whether they're going to do that. And what I find so interesting is that we're actually, when she talks about coup, we're still working within a democratic system. You have three powers, which are, if you will, fighting amongst each other. And if you talk about the Petrobras scandal, in fact, a number of analysts have said this is really, if you will, the judicial branch muscling in and showing much more power than ever has been the case in Brazil. But quite clearly, the Constitution permits that. And the Constitution also permits the Congress to impeach the president. And so we will just have to see what happens. But what's interesting is we're talking about presidents, we're talking about Congress, we're talking about judicial system, we're not talking about the military, we're not talking about public pressure, demonstrations, the palace being raided, or anything like that. So in that sense, I think it's quite different. And if you will, within the range of democratic possibilities with a system such as that Brazil has with its constitution.
With everyone around her mired in this Petrobras scandal, could she have known?
Well, that's the really big question, isn't it? My sense is after seeing how large it was, how could she not have known? And if she didn't know, which is a possibility, I have no idea, is why didn't she know? And I think that's the other question. In other words, one of the main reasons why she was elected initially was because everybody said, she's a manager. She knows how to manage something, and she managed Petrobras, which is one of the largest petroleum oil companies in the world, one of the largest companies in the world. But quite clearly she didn't manage it very well, so in fact, rather than that being in her favor, is really now against her as well, because even if she didn't know, that's almost as bad as if she did know.
Interesting. We have one more clip. President Dilma Rousseff again making her case for why she should remain president.
O candidato adversário teve 51 milhões de votos. E desde o primeiro dia, logo após a minha posse, o que aconteceu? Primeiro pediram recontagem dos votos. E se verificou que não tinha nenhum problema. Depois pediram a reavaliação das urnas. Depois tentaram impedir que eu tomasse posse. E depois passaram sistematicamente a impedir o meu governo pelo controle que tinham da Câmara de Deputados. Então, no Brasil, não foi só uma crise econômica que eu enfrentei. Eu enfrentei uma crise econômica sobreposta a uma crise política. Uma crise política que a oposição forçava a deterioração do ambiente para criar as condições para ocorrer esse impeachment fraudulento ou golpe de Estado.
What does the future hold for President Dilma Rousseff? How do you see the impeachment trial playing out?
Well, as I told you, I'm a historian. I prefer to look backwards than forward. But it seems quite obvious to me that she will probably not get back into power. Of course, who knows? My sense is also that it's highly likely that the interim government will not last that long, and that the Brazilian government will have to call for new elections. And of course, then all bets are off, because so many people are implicated with so many things, and the country really is doing very poorly. I think it last year lost 4% of its GDP. It's predicted that this year it will as well. So it's economically a mess, and of course there is this political storm brewing, just like President Rousseff talked about, in which people are really at each other's throats. It sounds a little bit like the United States, in fact, in many ways in politics, but here it might be even more severe.
Will we see a complete turnaround of leadership if it comes to new elections? What will it take to turn the country around?
Well, this is the real problem, is that people have said if President Rousseff is impeached for something like this, you can do that practically with every governor of each state, which is, of course, the next generation, if you will, and certainly Congress being very much implicated in the Petrobras scandal as well. Plus, of course, so many people of the business class also being in jail right now because of that as well. And so the real problem is who can that new renovating force be? And that's not clear at all, because so many people are implicated in it, and basically from every single party except for the most marginal ones, that's the case. So it's really impossible to see right now, because it seems like the whole political class, if you will, is implicated. Of course, that might set up for a new populism, as is occurring in many other countries, but we don't know. Brazil is Brazil, and Brazil is a huge country and has its unique history and also its unique political climate, and that's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in the future.
Professor Eric Langer from Georgetown University, thank you so much for joining us here on America's Now.
Thank you very much for having me.
America's Now.
Welcome back. This week we introduce a new segment we'll be featuring over the coming months on America's Now. It's called Olympians and focuses on the athletes who will compete in the 2016 Olympic Games in Brazil. Each report profiles a sportsman or woman preparing for the global competition. This week we introduce you to an athlete from the Yucatan Peninsula who's been diving since he was 6 years old. Now at 29, he is getting ready to compete in his third Games. He finished in the top 10 in diving events in both the 2004 and 2008 Olympics and is one of Mexico's biggest hopes for winning a gold medal in Rio. Meet Olympian Rommel Pacheco.
Cuando me subo al trampolín, cuando es una competencia, solo me enfoco en lo que tengo que hacer. Estar parado y decir, ahorita lo voy a hacer bien. El poder estar en el aire, el dar vueltas y que te salga bien. Disfruto el caer bien y ver las calificaciones. La competencia es interna, es con uno mismo. Lo que te dices, lo que haces, cómo te sientes. Al estar bien, al estar confiado y al sentirte bien, creo que puedo tener una buena competencia y tener una buena puntuación. Los clavados para mí, pues es mi vida. O sea, llevo casi 23 años en esto. Me la paso más entrenando que cualquier otra cosa. Entonces me ha dado todo, me ha forjado carácter, me ha dado medallas, conocer países, conocer gente. Entonces agradezco mucho el poderlo hacer, el que me guste, el que lo disfruto. Yo empecé como a los 6, 7 años clavados. Y así estuve en Mérida, iba a nacionales infantiles y olimpiada infantil, todo eso. A los 11 años me proponen venirme a la Ciudad de México a formar parte de un programa de niños con talentos, con miras hacia el futuro, hacia Juegos Olímpicos. Competencia diaria, en el entrenamiento se ganan las competencias. Yo entreno 6 días a la semana, son 2 entrenamientos en la mañana y en la tarde, aproximadamente son de 6:30 horas hasta pueden ser 8 horas juntando los 2 entrenamientos. En la mañana es calentamiento, hacemos en el gimnasio de clavados la preparación. Después pasamos al agua, que es hacer los clavados, y en la tarde hacemos pesas unos días y los otros días es fuerza muy específica de clavado. Hay días que estoy muy cansado, que sí, hay días que tal vez no quieras entrenar, pero sé que si no entreno hoy, los demás están entrenando y a la hora de la competencia se va a ver quién entrenó más. No es una preparación de meses, es de años. Participé en los Juegos Olímpicos de Atenas 2004, mis primeros Juegos, y en Beijing 2008.
En esta final se va a exigir muchísimo y es dado, el clavado puede valer 7, pero también le pueden dar 6,5.
Por cabeza, por presión, cuando de competencia, perdió y no aguantó, eso por cabeza. También después se sintió muy triste, eso de momento la verdad muy difícil para Loma, sí o no.
Hay veces que pues no te va bien en alguna competencia, trabajas mucho, llegas y te va mal, pero al contrario, en vez de querer tirar la toalla, eso me alienta a entrenar más, a ver qué pasó, a tratar de corregir las cosas.
¿Por qué?
Sobre todo México, yo creo que es un país muy bonito, que está en crecimiento, pero la gente todavía no se ha dado cuenta del potencial que uno puede alcanzar si trabaja y se forja metas. Entonces, creo que nosotros como deportistas a veces somos como un pequeño ejemplo de lo que se puede hacer con el trabajo y se puede replicar en cualquier cosa, en el área laboral, en lo familiar, en lo emocional. Yo creo que todo es cuestión de dedicación y de trabajo, y si uno quiere algo y le gusta y lo disfruta, al fin y al cabo va a conseguir sus metas. ahorita ya llego más maduro, sí, con muchas ganas de querer estar en medalla, con muchas posibilidades.
Loma ya tiene clavados, tiene su nivel y tiene experiencia, tiene su meta muy fuerte para llegar.
O sea, que quisiera ganar la de oro. Pues tengo dos posibilidades, tanto en sincronizado como en individual. Cuando te están premiando, te están colgando la medalla, sobre todo la de oro, ahí es cuando se ve recompensado todo el esfuerzo de años de trabajo, de dedicación.
On his social media page, Rommel describes himself as a motivational speaker in addition to an Olympic diver. When he's not diving, he motivates himself by going to the movies and listening to a wide variety of music.
America's Now.
Finally, for centuries, Spanish artists have contributed and influenced the world of art. Illustrators like Pablo Picasso, who is considered the father of modern art, or Salvador Dali, the famous Spanish surrealist, are considered the pillars of contemporary art. Their use of colors paved the path for a younger generation of artists who continue to draw on this tradition. We leave you with some images of a color celebration which took place here in Washington called Spanish Illustrators, the Color of Optimism. Thanks for watching this special edition of America's Now. We'll see you again next week.
Ilustradores españoles, el color del optimismo. Es la manera que tienen los artistas de demostrar la idiosincrasia del carácter latino que también tenemos en Europa. La tradición en España en torno a la ilustración está ligada desde hace muchísimos años con los grandes artistas españoles como Picasso, Dalí o Miró. La vinculación de los artistas españoles, de los ilustradores españoles con Latinoamérica y con Estados Unidos es enorme. Un ejemplo pues es Paula Bonet, por ejemplo, la imagen de esta exposición. Ella trabaja habitualmente bastante en Chile, o Ricardo Cábolo, toda una celebridad de la ilustración también en México.
I'm preparing a mural. Usually I just create everything in my mind first. Well, the idea in this case, I wanted to create like this bridge between the Spanish and the North American or from the US culture, like a bridge between them and connecting the two cultures, like this place is doing right now with the exhibition.
This one is a kind of etching. If you put these pieces in front of the sun, the pieces don't lose their color in 100 years.
It's like two women, one is Spain, the other one is the US, and just like sharing and sending letters of love.
Next week on America's Now.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us here on America's Now. What was your reaction when you heard OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro proposed a meeting to discuss suspending your country from the OAS?
Well, I was surprised, but at the same time, I found that Almagro was taking a kind of hysterical behavior.
Do you think Venezuela will leave the OAS on its own?
For us, the OAS plays a role because it's a way of connecting and participating with countries like Canada and the US in the same table.
Panchita Castillo, Reineri Fonseca, José Guevara, Andrés López.
They are some of the dozens of people who are more than 100 years old living on the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. It is an idyllic finger of land located off of the country's Pacific coast. The weather is good, air is fresh, life is simple. People seem like they want to live forever. But there is much more to the secret of longevity on the peninsula.